Adelaide Mercer slapped Edmund Hale across the face so hard the sound cracked down Main Street like a pistol shot. 21 days on a stagecoach, 2,000 miles of dust and prayer. And the man she'd crossed the country to marry was standing right there in the middle of Cottonwood, Texas, with a pregnant woman in pale blue silk hanging on his arm like she'd always been there. Because she had. Addie's carpet bag hit the dirt. Her engagement letter was still warm in her pocket. The whole town was watching. Nobody made a sound. Thank you for joining this story. If you stay until the very end, you'll witness how the worst day of Adelaide Mercer's life became the greatest gift she ever received. Please hit that subscribe button, leave a comment with the city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale of second chances travels, and follow along, because this story is just getting started. The slap echoed. Edmund Hale stumbled back 2 steps, his hand flying to his cheek, his eyes wide and wet like a dog caught eating off the table. "Addie, don't." She held up the letter, his letter, the one that said, "Come to me, my darling. Everything is ready. Our life begins the moment you step off that coach." She'd read it so many times, the folds were wearing through. "Don't you dare say my name like you have the right." Behind Edmund, the blonde girl in pale blue silk pressed both hands against her swollen belly and looked like she wanted the earth to open and take her whole. She couldn't have been older than 19. A child. A pregnant child, wearing a gold ring that should have been Addie's. The older man, standing off to the side, a minister, collar and all, cleared his throat like he'd swallowed a stone. "Miss Mercer, I'm Reverend Samuel Holt. Edmund asked me to meet you, to explain." "Explain what?" Addie's voice cut clean. "That the man who proposed by letter sent me passage money, promised me a home and a future. He married someone else 6 weeks ago and didn't bother to tell me until I was already standing in his street." "I sent a telegram," Edmund said. His cheek was turning red where she'd hit him. 3 weeks ago, telling you not to come." "How convenient that I never received it." "Addie, please, listen to me. Louise's father, Silas Breckenridge, he owns the biggest ranch in 3 counties. When he offered his daughter's hand, it came with land, cattle, connections. It was an opportunity I couldn't refuse." Addie finished it for him. Her jaw ached from clenching. "So you took the rich man's daughter and threw me away like a used handkerchief. And you couldn't even do it to my face. You sent a telegram." The crowd had thickened. Every doorway on Main Street had a body in it. Women in clusters, whispering behind their hands. Cowboys leaning on hitching posts, watching like it was better than any show they'd paid for. Children had stopped playing. Even the dogs had gone quiet. Addie felt every single eye. She was the spectacle. The jilted woman from back east, sweating through her travel-stained dress, holding a love letter that turned out to be a lie. This was the most exciting thing that had happened in Cottonwood in months, and she was the entertainment. "I'll pay your passage back to Boston," Edmund said quickly. "The next stage comes through in 4 days. There's a boarding house, Mrs. Pruitt's place. I'll cover your room until—" "He'll cover my room," Addie laughed. It came out wrong, sharp, broken, the sound of something tearing. "You've destroyed my life, Edmund. I sold everything I owned. I have $14, no family, nowhere to go. And you'll cover my room for 4 days. What a generous man you are." The blonde girl, Louisa, tugged Edmund's sleeve. "Edmund, maybe we should—" "Should what?" Addie turned on her, and Louisa flinched hard enough that her whole body swayed. "Invite me to supper? Give me a room in your ranch house so I can watch you raise the family that was supposed to be mine? Or maybe your daddy could hire me as a maid. I reckon I'd make a fine servant for the woman who's wearing my future on her finger." Louisa's eyes filled with tears. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. And then a voice from the crowd, male, quiet, steady as a fence post sunk in bedrock, said two words that stopped everything. "That's enough." Addie turned. He'd been standing at the edge of the crowd the whole time. She was sure of it. He had the look of a man who'd been watching for a while, deciding whether to step in. Tall, lean, dark hair, dark eyes, a scar running along his jawline, like someone had tried to open his throat and almost succeeded. Dusty work clothes, leather vest, Stetson pulled low. His hands hung loose at his sides, but there was nothing relaxed about him. He stood the way men stand who've learned to be ready for anything. Balanced, still, coiled. "This doesn't concern you, Wyatt," Edmund said, his voice pitched higher than before. "It concerns every person on this street." The man called Wyatt didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He looked at the crowd, slow, deliberate, making eye contact one face at a time. And people started looking at their boots. "Show's over. Every last one of you. Go on about your business." A few people shuffled. Most didn't move. "Figured." Wyatt stepped forward. Not toward Edmund. Toward Addie. He stopped at a respectful distance, close enough to talk, far enough that she didn't feel crowded. She caught the smell of leather, sage, and work sweat. Honest smells. "Miss Mercer, I'm Wyatt Callahan. I run a ranch north of here." He paused. His thumb rubbed against his forefinger. Small, unconscious, the only sign that anything underneath was less than perfectly calm. "I don't know you. You don't know me. But I know what it looks like when the ground opens up under somebody's feet. And I've been standing here for 5 minutes trying to decide if it's my place to say anything." "And you decided it is?" "I decided you deserve better than being gawked at." Another pause. His jaw worked slightly, like the next words cost him something. "I want to make you an offer. And you can tell me to go straight to hell." "What kind of offer?" "The kind Edmund should have made before he went chasing a rich man's daughter." Wyatt still didn't look at Edmund, but Edmund took a step back anyway, pulling Louisa with him. "I need a wife. My ranch needs a woman's hand. You need a home that doesn't come with charity or shame attached. We could make a deal. Honest, straight, no pretty lies. 6 months to see if we suit. If we don't, I give you passage anywhere in this country and $200 to start fresh. If we do..." He stopped. For the first time, something uncertain crossed his face. Barely there, gone in a blink, but Addie caught it. "We figure it out as we go." "You're proposing marriage to a stranger in the middle of the street." "I've done worse things in worse places." Something flickered behind his eyes. Dark, old, not meant for daylight. Then it was gone. "And Edmund was a stranger too. Least I'm telling you the truth about what I am and what I've got, which ain't much." "This is insane." Edmund stepped forward, puffing up like a rooster. "Addie, you cannot possibly consider this. Wyatt's got nothing. No money, no connections, a ranch that's falling apart." "And yet I ain't the one who lied to a woman and left her stranded 2,000 miles from everything she's ever known." Wyatt's voice didn't change, didn't rise, but something shifted underneath it. Something Addie recognized from veterans she'd known in Boston. Men who could go from still water to flood in a single heartbeat. "I'd be real careful what comes out of your mouth next, Edmund. You ain't earned the right to judge anybody standing on this street." Edmund shut his mouth. Addie looked between them. Edmund, sweating, red-faced, clutching his pregnant teenage bride and her father's money and every lie he'd ever told. Wyatt, still as deep water, offering something that made no rational sense, but rang truer than anything Edmund had put in 21 letters. "Why?" she asked Wyatt directly. "Why would you do this for someone you've never met?" He didn't answer right away. His thumb worked against his finger again, that small, telling gesture. When he spoke, his voice dropped lower, pitched just for her. "Because I've stood where you're standing. Different dirt, same feeling. Like someone reached inside your chest and pulled the ground out." He held her eyes. "And because every soul on this street is waiting to see you break. I figured you might want the chance to prove them all wrong." That did it. Not the offer, the understanding. The recognition of exactly what was happening to her, and the refusal to let it continue. "I need time," Addie said. "Is there really a boarding house?" "There is." Reverend Holt materialized at her side, mopping his forehead with visible relief. "Mrs. Pruitt's place. I'll walk you there myself." Wyatt bent and picked up her carpetbag before she could reach for it. To the Reverend, he said, "I'll cover her room, however long." "Now hold on," Edmund started. "You lost any say about Miss Mercer the day you put a ring on somebody else's finger." Wyatt turned his back on Edmund completely. "Come on, ma'am. Let's get you out of this sun." 3 blocks in silence. Reverend Holt on her left, Wyatt on her right. The explosion of gossip detonating behind them like cannon fire. Addie felt it all. The whispers, the stares, the heat pressing down on her skull like a hot iron. She kept her spine straight. She kept her eyes dead ahead. She did not cry. She would not cry. Not here. Not in front of these people. Not ever about Edmund Hale. The boarding house was pale yellow, with a sagging porch and flower boxes that had no business surviving Texas heat, but did anyway. The woman in the doorway was built like a flour sack, round, solid, impossible to knock over. Maybe 52, with eyes sharp enough to read fine print at 40 paces. "Delia," Reverend Holt started. "I heard." Cordelia Pruitt looked at Addie the way a doctor looks at a patient, assessing damage, calculating treatment. "Whole town heard. Edmund Hale's a coward, and his new father-in-law's a snake. Come inside before you fall down." Inside was cool, smelled of lemon and bread. Addie drank water so fast it ran down her chin, and she didn't care. Reverend Holt excused himself. And then it was just her and Wyatt, standing in Delia's sitting room with the impossible weight of his offer between them. "I meant everything I said." Wyatt set her bag down. He was standing near the door, like a man who'd leave the second she asked him to. "Offer stands, but I understand if you need time. Or if you decide I'm a lunatic and you'd rather take your chances on the stage back east." "Why are you being kind to me?" The words cracked despite everything. "You don't know me. I could be a drunk, a thief, completely useless." "Could be." The corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile, exactly, but the ghost of where one might live. "But you walked 3 blocks through that mess with your head up and your back straight. You didn't beg, didn't cry, didn't give them what they wanted." He paused. "That counts for something out here." "Spine doesn't cook meals." "No, ma'am, but it keeps you standing while you learn how." He moved toward the door. "I'm not offering love, Miss Mercer. I'm not sure I've got that to give anymore. I'm offering partnership, real work, real honesty, building something together. If that interests you, I'll be at the Lucky Star Saloon tomorrow evening." He stopped in the doorway without turning around. "If it doesn't, I understand. Either way, the room's yours." He left before she could answer. Didn't look back. Delia appeared with food, bread, cheese, cold chicken, and a look that said she'd heard every word through the wall and wasn't sorry about it. "Eat, then we talk." Addie ate. The bread tasted like nothing. She made herself chew anyway. "Delia, is Wyatt Callahan real? Or is this town just determined to destroy me in new and creative ways?" Delia sat down hard, like she'd been waiting for exactly this question. "Wyatt Callahan is the most real man in 3 counties, which is exactly why half the unmarried women in this town have tried to land him, and not a single one's come close." "Then why isn't he married?" "Because he came back from the war and wasn't the same boy who left." Delia's voice dropped. "He was engaged before. Girl named Sarah. Good family. Then his daddy died, left him buried in gambling debts, and Sarah's father broke it off. Girl didn't even fight it. Sent a letter. Didn't have the spine to say it to his face." "He went to war?" "Union Army. 3 years. Came back with that scar on his jaw and something behind his eyes that wasn't there before. Quieter. Harder. Sleeps light. Ruth McCready lives nearest to him, says she's seen his lamp burning at 3 in the morning more times than she can count." Delia's hands folded in her lap. "He doesn't talk about it. Doesn't talk about much of anything, truth be told. Just works. Sun up to sundown, 7 days a week, trying to dig out from under his daddy's mess." Addie turned this over. A man wounded by war and betrayal, offering partnership to a woman fresh off her own betrayal. Both of them stripped down to nothing but stubbornness and the refusal to quit. "So he needs someone who won't run when things get hard," Addie said. "And you need someone who won't throw you away when something shinier comes along." Delia's gaze was steady. "Might be you two understand each other better than most folks who've been courting for years." A knock at the front door interrupted them. Delia went to answer it, and Addie heard a voice that made her stomach clench. Edmund's voice, pitched low and urgent. "I need to speak with Miss Mercer, please, just 5 minutes." Delia's voice came back iron hard. "She doesn't want to see you, Mr. Hale." "Please, I need her to understand. Let him in." Addie's own voice surprised her. She stood up from the table. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. They were still. "Let him say whatever he came to say." Edmund walked into that sitting room like a man walking to his own hanging. He'd taken off his hat. His eyes were red-rimmed. Without the crowd watching, without Louisa on his arm, he looked smaller, older, pathetic in a way that made Addie's anger shift into something colder. "5 minutes," she said. "I'm sorry." Edmund's voice broke on the word. "Addie, I'm truly sorry. I never meant for this to happen. When Breckenridge offered Louisa, the land, the cattle, the connections, I tried to say no. I swear I did. But you don't understand what it's like out here. How much power that man has." "You're blaming him." "No, I'm explaining." "You're blaming a rich man for the choice you made with your own 2 hands." Addie's voice was level, clinical, a surgeon cutting. "You wrote me letters for 4 months, Edmund. Beautiful letters. I believed every word. I sold my mother's furniture. I quit the only job I had. I got on that stagecoach because you told me to, because you promised me a life." She paused. "Was any of it real? Even one word?" Edmund opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I cared about you," he said finally. "I did. You cared about me the way a man cares about a backup plan." Addie reached into her pocket and pulled out his letters, all of them, tied with a ribbon she'd bought specially. She set them on the table between them. "I want you to know something, Edmund. I'm not going back to Boston." His eyes widened. "You're not? You're considering Callahan's offer? Addie, you can't. That man has nothing. His ranch is falling apart. His father left him drowning in debt. His father was a gambler who destroyed everything he touched. Addie tilted her head. Funny. From where I'm standing, gambling on pretty promises doesn't seem that different from gambling on cattle futures. At least Wyatt Callahan told me the truth about what he's offering. He's using you. He needs free labor. And you needed a woman foolish enough to cross 2,000 miles on the strength of a lie. We all need something, Edmund. The difference is, Wyatt told me what he needs to my face, in front of the whole town. You told me what you needed in secret, where nobody could hold you to it. Edmund stared at her. His mouth worked. Nothing came out. Your 5 minutes are up. Addie picked up the bundle of letters and held them out to him. Take these. I don't want them. He didn't reach for them. Take them, Edmund, or I'll burn them in Delia's stove and the whole boarding house will smell like your broken promises for a week. He took them. His hand was trembling. Addie noticed that and felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not pity. Just the flat recognition that this man had never been strong enough for her. Had never been strong enough for anyone. Louisa Breckenridge was going to learn that soon enough. I hope you find what you're looking for, Addie, Edmund said from the doorway. I hope your wife's father doesn't eat you alive, Addie answered. But I reckon he will. Edmund left. The door closed behind him. Delia appeared from the kitchen, where she'd clearly been listening to every syllable. Well, Delia said. Well, Addie said. You handled that better than any woman I've ever seen handle anything. I don't feel like I handled it. I feel like I watched someone else do it while I stood somewhere far away. Addie sat down heavily. Delia, I'm going to that saloon tomorrow. I know you are. I need to ask him every hard question I can think of. I need to see his ranch. I need to know exactly what I'd be walking into. And then? Addie looked at the table where Edmund's letters had sat moments before. The space was empty now. Clean. And then I'm going to make the first real choice I've ever made in my life. She didn't sleep. The ceiling had a crack shaped like a river, and Addie memorized every inch of it before midnight. She pulled Edmund's engagement letter from her pocket, the last one, the one she'd kept. Read it once in the lamplight, then folded it carefully and tucked it inside her mother's Bible at the very back, behind Revelation. Not to keep, to remember. To remind herself every time she opened that book what pretty lies looked like written down. By dawn, she was sitting up, running questions through her head like a woman loading a revolver. Chamber by chamber, click by click. Delia knocked with breakfast and a look that said she'd been up half the night herself. You've got that face, Delia said, pouring coffee that could have dissolved a horseshoe. What face? The one that says you already decided, but you're pretending you're still thinking. Delia set the cup down hard. Eat, and wear practical shoes. That road north is more hope than actual path. Addie spent the morning at the general store. Harold Perkins recognized her before she'd fully stepped through the door. You're the one Edmund jilted, he said. Watched it from my window. Never seen a woman hit a man that hard and still look dignified doing it. I need fabric, Mr. Perkins. Brown cotton, dark blue, and a green if you've got it. Thread, needles, buttons. I was a seamstress in Boston for 3 years. I can sew better than anyone in this territory. So don't try to sell me cheap goods. Harold grinned. Yes, ma'am. She was choosing fabric when the door opened and a voice, sharp, measured, accustomed to authority, filled the store. So you're the Boston girl. Addie turned. The woman was perhaps 60. Iron gray hair, impeccable posture despite the heat, dressed in dove gray that must have cost more than Addie earned in a month. Her eyes didn't just look at Addie. They appraised her. The way you'd appraise a horse before deciding whether it was worth the feed. Vivian Cartwright. My husband owns the bank. Pleased to meet you. No, you're not, but that's fine. Vivian moved closer. I heard about Wyatt Callahan's little performance yesterday. Very dramatic. Very noble. I wonder, has anyone told you the full truth about that man? Delia Pruitt told me about his debts, his father's gambling, the broken engagement. Delia told you the kind version. Vivian's eyes narrowed. Let me ask you something, Miss Mercer. What do you do when a man you've committed your life to wakes up screaming at 2 a.m. and won't tell you why? What do you do when he goes days without speaking? Not angry, not cold, just gone somewhere inside himself where you can't reach him? What do you do when the man you married is fighting a war that ended 10 years ago and you can't help him win it? The store went quiet. Harold stopped pretending to arrange stock. Addie opened her mouth. Nothing came out. For the first time since stepping off that stagecoach, she had no sharp answer ready. That's what I thought. Vivian's voice wasn't cruel. It was honest in a way that cut deeper than cruelty. Wyatt Callahan is a good man. I won't deny that. But good men carry burdens that can crush the women standing next to them. My daughter learned that the hard way. I'd rather you learned it now, before you've signed your name to something you don't fully understand. Addie's throat was dry. Are you telling me not to marry him? I'm telling you to go in with your eyes wide open. Not just about the money and the debt and the broken fences. About the man himself. What the war did to him. What the betrayal did to him. What he won't say out loud because he thinks asking for help is the same as being weak. Vivian held her gaze. If you can handle that, truly handle it, not just survive it, then you might be exactly what he needs. But if you can't, you'll both end up destroyed. She bought nothing. She said nothing more. She walked out of the store, and the door swung shut behind her, and the silence she left was heavier than anything Edmund Hale had ever caused. Harold spoke first. She's not wrong, you know, about any of it. Addie stared at the fabric in her hands. Brown cotton. Practical. No frills. The fabric of a life that would be harder than anything she'd ever attempted. I know she's not, Addie said quietly. That's what scares me. She paid for her goods, walked back to the boarding house, cut and sewed until the light failed, the rhythm of needle and thread the only thing keeping her hands steady and her mind from flying apart. As the sun bled out across the horizon, she changed into her new dress, pinned her hair, looked in the mirror. The woman looking back was thinner, harder. Her jaw was set like she'd wired it shut. Her gray eyes were dry and clear. All right, she said to that woman. Let's go find out everything. The Lucky Star Saloon. Piano. Laughter. Tobacco smoke. The swinging doors between her old life and whatever came next. Addie pushed through. The piano died. Every head turned. Every eye landed. Wyatt was in the corner, half-finished whiskey. When he saw her, he stood fast. Too fast, knocking his chair back an inch before catching it. For one unguarded second, his face showed everything he'd been hiding. Relief, hope, fear, all of it crashing together before he locked it down again behind that wall of calm. Miss Mercer, his voice carried. I wasn't sure you'd come. Neither was I, Addie crossed to him. We need to talk. Every question I've got, you answer honest. One lie, and I'm on the next stage east. Deal? Deal. Then let's start with the thing nobody in this town will say to your face. Addie sat down across from him and loaded her first round. Tell me about the war, Wyatt. Tell me what it did to you. And don't you dare say nothing. His hand tightened around the whiskey glass. The calm cracked, just a hairline fracture, barely visible, but Addie saw it. "That's where you want to start?" he asked quietly. "That's where I need to start. Because everything else, the ranch, the debt, the partnership, none of it matters if I don't understand the man I'd be standing next to." Wyatt looked at her for a long time. The lantern flickered. The saloon noise faded to a distant hum. Then he pushed the whiskey aside, folded his hands on the table, and for the first time in years, started talking about the things he'd sworn he'd never tell anyone. Wyatt didn't start with a battle. He started with a sound. "Shiloh," he said. "April of '62. I was 19 years old, and I'd never heard a cannon before. You think you know what loud means until artillery opens up 50 yards from where you're standing. Then you realize you didn't know anything about anything." His hands were flat on the table, still, but his thumbs pressed hard against the wood, like he was anchoring himself to something solid. "I'm not going to sit here and tell you every terrible thing I saw, Miss Mercer. I wouldn't do that to you, and I wouldn't do it to myself. But I'll tell you what it left me with, because that's what you're really asking." He met her eyes. "I don't sleep well. Some nights, I don't sleep at all. I wake up in places that aren't Texas, and it takes me a minute to come back. Sometimes I go quiet, not angry, not cold, just somewhere else. I can't always control when it happens or how long it lasts." "How often?" "Used to be every night. Now, maybe once or twice a week. Getting better, slowly." His jaw worked. "I don't drink much because whiskey makes it worse. I don't like sudden loud noises, gunshots, thunder, anything that sounds like what I heard at Shiloh. And I've got a temper I keep on a short leash, because if I let it loose, I'm not sure I could pull it back." Addie absorbed this. Not the words themselves, but the cost of saying them. The way his voice stayed level while his knuckles went white. The way he held her gaze like a man standing in front of a firing squad who decided not to wear the blindfold. "Has it ever made you dangerous?" she asked. "To someone who didn't deserve it?" "No." No hesitation. "I've broken furniture, put my fist through a wall once, rode my horse 20 miles in the dark because I needed to move or I was going to come apart. But I've never raised a hand to a person who wasn't trying to kill me first, and I never will." "How can you be sure?" "Because that's the one line I drew when I came home, and I haven't crossed it in 10 years. Something raw moved behind his eyes. "I won't lie to you and say I'm easy to live with. I'm not. There'll be nights I can't talk, mornings I can't explain why I'm staring at nothing. But I will never hurt you. Not with my hands, not on purpose, not ever. That's the only promise I'll make that I'm absolutely certain I can keep." The saloon noise pressed against the walls of their small room. Laughter, piano, the clink of glasses. Sounds from a world that had nothing to do with what was happening at this table. "Thank you," Addie said quietly, "for telling me." "You asked. You had the right." Wyatt's thumbs released their pressure on the table. He flexed his hands once, twice, like a man coming back into his own body after being somewhere far away. "Your turn. Ask me the rest." "The ranch. Delia told me the basics. Your father's debts, the mortgage. But I want numbers. Real ones." $800 still owing. I'm current on payments. $32 a month, due on the 1st. I've got 40 head of cattle, 3 horses, some chickens and pigs. 300 acres, most of it grazing land. Water rights to Jessup Creek, which runs year-round except in the worst drought. The cabin's 2 rooms, needs work. The barn's sound. Fences need mending in half a dozen places. Income? Last year I cleared about $400 after expenses. This year should be better. I've got more cattle and prices are up. But one bad winter, one disease running through the herd, one stretch of drought, and that margin disappears. So you're surviving, but barely. That's an honest description. Addie leaned forward. What would a wife actually do on this ranch, Wyatt? Give me the list. Not the pretty version, the real one. Cook 3 meals a day on a wood stove that has a temper worse than mine. Tend a garden that's currently dying because I don't know the difference between overwatering and underwatering. Gather eggs, slop pigs, help with the milk cow if we can afford one. Laundry, mending, cleaning, preserving whatever food we can grow or hunt. Keeping the books straight. Managing supplies so we don't run out of flour in January. And you? Cattle, fences, heavy repairs, hay cutting. That's the worst of it, and it's coming soon. Riding the property line to check for strays, predators, damage. Building anything that needs building. During roundup season, I hire temporary help, but otherwise it's just me. He paused. Just us, if you say yes. That's 2 people doing the work of 4. Yes, ma'am, it is. And if I get sick? If you get hurt? There's no margin for error. No, there isn't. Wyatt's voice was plain as dirt. I'm not selling you a dream, Miss Mercer. I'm telling you the truth, and hoping you're strong enough to hear it. Addie sat back. Her mind was doing what it always did when she worked a difficult seam. Measuring twice, calculating angles, figuring out how the pieces fit before making the first cut. I grew up in a boarding house in Boston, she said. My mother took in laundry. I helped from the time I was 8. We shared a room with 2 other families. I've worked 12-hour days since I was 14. I can sew anything, and I mean anything. Dresses, curtains, harnesses if you show me the leather. My mother kept a kitchen garden that fed half our building, and she taught me everything she knew about soil and seeds and growing things. Wyatt was watching her with an expression she couldn't fully read. I let Edmund believe I was refined, Addie continued. Educated. I was ashamed of what I really was. But I'm done being ashamed. She held his gaze. I'm a working woman, Wyatt. That's all I've ever been. Good. The word hit the table like a fist. Refinement won't keep you alive where I live. Work will. Honesty will. I have one more question. Go ahead. If we do this, if we try for 6 months and it works, what happens? What does this become? Wyatt was quiet for a long time, not avoiding the question, working through it, the way he worked through everything. Carefully, honestly, refusing to say more than he meant. A real marriage, he said finally. A partnership that turns into something more, if we're both willing. A home. A family, maybe, if that's something we both want. But I won't rush any of it, and I won't fake any of it. Whatever grows between us grows because it's real, not because either of us is pretending. And if it doesn't grow? If we get to 6 months and we're still strangers sharing a roof? Then we part clean. I keep my word. Passage anywhere, $200. No blame and no bitterness. You walk away knowing you gave it an honest try. And so do I. Addie pulled in a breath, held it, let it go. I want to see the ranch tomorrow, she said. The real thing. Every broken fence, every leaking roof, every dying tomato. Then I'll give you my answer. Fair enough. Wyatt stood when she stood. I'll arrange a ride for you. One more thing. Addie stopped him before he could move toward the door. The sleeping. The quiet spells. The nights you can't talk. If I say yes to this, I need you to promise me something. Name it. Don't shut me out. You don't have to explain everything. You don't have to talk when talking's too hard. But don't pretend it's not happening. Don't make me guess whether you're angry at me or fighting something I can't see. Just tell me which one it is, even if all you can say is, it's not you. Can you do that? Something moved across Wyatt's face. Slow, deep, like a crack spreading through ice in spring. Not breaking, opening. I can try, he said. That's the most honest answer I've got. Trying is enough. He walked her back through the saloon. The crowd parted. Nobody said a word. Outside, the stars were thick enough to choke on, and the night air had finally surrendered its heat. Sleep well, Miss Mercer. Adelaide, she said, if you're going to propose marriage to me, you might as well use my name. Something happened to his mouth. A twitch, almost a smile, gone before it fully arrived. Adelaide, that's a serious name. I'm a serious woman. Yes, ma'am, I noticed. He tipped his hat and walked into the darkness. Addie watched him go, counted his footsteps until she couldn't hear them anymore. Then she went inside and told Delia everything. Delia listened without interrupting. When Addie finished, the older woman was quiet for a full minute, staring at the table like she could read the future in its grain. He told you about the war, Delia said finally. He hasn't told anyone about the war. Not me, not Reverend Holt, not Ruth McCready, who lives closest to him. He told me because I asked. He told you because he trusts you. Delia looked up. After what Sarah did to him, I didn't think he'd trust anyone again. You got something out of that man in one evening that this whole town hasn't managed in 10 years. That means something, girl. It means he's desperate. No, desperate men lie. Wyatt told you the worst of himself and let you decide. That's not desperation. That's courage. Addie didn't sleep. The crack in the ceiling, the sounds of cottonwood settling into night. Her mind running calculations that had nothing to do with numbers and everything to do with the kind of life she wanted to live. Morning. Delia's coffee. A wagon driven by a young man named Jesse, who spoke exactly 3 times during the 8-mile ride. Watch for snakes. Hang on. And we're here. The ranch sat against the hills like something that had grown out of the land itself. Small, worn, a cabin with a tin roof, a barn that leaned slightly, corrals made of rough posts, a garden that looked like it was losing a war. And Wyatt, walking out of the barn, wiping his hands on his pants, his face changing when he saw the wagon. Hope and fear fighting for the same space. Adelaide, you came. I said I would. Jesse unloaded her, took his payment, and drove away without ceremony. Silence landed like a physical thing. Enormous, pressing, nothing like the noise of Boston. Just wind, grass, the distant complaint of cattle. It's quiet, Addie said. Drives some folks crazy. Wyatt watched her face. Want to see inside? She saw everything. The main room, wood stove, rough table, 2 chairs, one with a broken spindle. The bedroom through a faded curtain, iron bed, worn quilt, a stack of books on the nightstand that surprised her. The second room, mostly storage, that could become something more. You read, she said. When I can't sleep? Almost defensive. Cattle journals mostly. Some history. My mother believed in education. Addie knelt by the vegetable garden and felt the soil between her fingers. You're overwatering. See the yellowing at the base? The roots are drowning. And these beans, they need nitrogen. Plant them near the chicken coop. Let the manure feed the soil. Wyatt stared at her. You can tell that just by looking? My mother could tell it. She taught me. Addie stood and brushed the dirt from her hands. I can fix this garden, make it produce, but I'll need seeds, chicken wire, and time to work the soil properly. Whatever you need. His voice had changed, something raw and hungry in it. Whatever you need to make this place work. They ate lunch on the porch. Martha had packed sandwiches, pickles, and cookies. They passed a jar of well water between them, taking turns drinking. The silence between them felt different from the silence in town. Not awkward, not loaded, just two people resting beside each other. Tell me about a normal day, Addie said. What would my life look like? Wyatt walked her through it, dawn to dark, every task, every hour. Feeding animals, cooking, mending, preserving, gardening, cleaning, accounting. He didn't soften it, didn't make it sound better than it was. It's exhausting, he finished. It's purposeful, Addie said, and something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, that she'd found the word he hadn't. Yeah, it is. Everything you do matters out here. No waste, no pretending. You work, you see results. Or you see failure and learn from it. Addie looked at the land stretching away from them. 300 acres of struggle and possibility and stubborn, beautiful emptiness. Show me the rest, she said. He took her everywhere. The fence lines, the irrigation ditches he dug by hand. The creek, clear, steady, the most valuable thing on the property. The cattle, distant dots that represented his entire livelihood. The 3 horses who nuzzled her hands looking for treats. Then he led her up a gentle slope behind the barn, through wildflowers that had no business surviving the heat. And at the top, the land fell away into a view that stopped her breathing. Miles of prairie rolling toward mountains. The creek cutting through it like a silver thread. Sky so big, it made her feel like she was standing on the edge of the world. This is why I couldn't sell, Wyatt said quietly. My grandfather homesteaded this land, built the first cabin with his own hands. My father nearly destroyed everything he built, but it's still here, still mine. Still yours, Addie repeated. She understood that kind of stubbornness, the refusal to let go, even when letting go would be easier. She'd felt it herself, clutching her mother's Bible through every mile of a journey that should have broken her. If I say yes, she said, when would we marry? Whenever you're ready. Tomorrow. Next week. And the arrangement? Separate rooms? Until we both decide different. I'm not interested in forcing anything. Addie turned to face him. The afternoon light was brutal on his features. Every line, every scar, every year of hard living laid bare. This was not a handsome man by any standard she'd been taught, but he was real in a way that made handsome seem like a lie. I want to say yes, she said, and watched hope crack open across his face like dawn breaking. But you need to understand what you're getting. I've never cooked on a wood stove, never preserved food, never handled livestock beyond collecting eggs one time. I can sow and garden and work until I drop, but I'll make mistakes, a lot of them. I don't want perfection. I want effort and honesty. Then yes. The word came out steady, sure, the steadiest thing she'd said since stepping off that stagecoach. Yes, I'll marry you, Wyatt. He didn't kiss her, didn't sweep her into his arms. He held out his hand, calloused, scarred, the hand of a man who'd built and broken and rebuilt with nothing but his own stubborn will. Partners, he said. Addie took his hand. His grip was warm and firm and absolutely certain. Partners. They shook on it like two people closing a business deal, and somehow that handshake felt more honest, more binding, more real than any romantic gesture she'd ever imagined. "Sunday," Wyatt said. "Reverend Holt can do it after services. Gives you 3 days to change your mind." "I won't change my mind, but I'll need the time to prepare, sew a proper dress, talk to Delia about supplies." "Whatever you need for the household, we'll get it before you come out here." Practical, grounded, no wasted words. "I'll talk to the Reverend." "Edmund and Louisa will be at the church." "Let them." "People will talk." "People have been talking since you stepped off that coach. Difference is, now they'll be talking about a woman who didn't let a liar define her future." Wyatt's voice held a conviction that settled something deep in Addie's chest. "This is about us, about what we're choosing to build. Edmund Hale is history." The ride back happened in a blur. Jesse appeared at sunset, silent as ever. Addie sat in the wagon bed, staring at the sky, turning colors she didn't have names for, her mind full of everything she'd seen and said and decided. Delia was on the porch. One look at Addie's face, and she nodded like a woman who'd known the answer before the question was asked. "You said yes. I said yes. And now I need you to teach me everything I don't know about keeping a household alive in 3 days. Then sit down and pick up a pencil. We're starting tonight." They worked until midnight. Delia at the kitchen table with paper and patience, walking Addie through meal planning, food preservation, wood stove management, supply rationing, emergency protocols. Addie wrote until her hand cramped, filling pages with notes she'd study like scripture. The next 2 days blurred together. Sewing her wedding dress, brown cotton, simple, well-made, because this wasn't a fairy tale and she wasn't pretending it was. Learning to make bread, burning the first batch, getting the second right, making the third without thinking. Practicing the wood stove until she could regulate its heat by feel. At the general store, Harold Perkins raised his eyebrows at her supply list. "Substantial order. Caleb's account is current, but this'll push his limit." "Put half on mine." Addie laid her money on the counter. "Edmund's passage money. I won't be needing it for a stage ticket." "Separate accounts for a joint household?" "Equal stakes, equal responsibility. That a problem, Harold?" "No, ma'am." He was grinning. "I'd say Wyatt Callahan's getting himself one hell of a partner." Vivian Cartwright appeared one more time. Not to warn, to offer. An envelope of letters introducing Addie to ranch wives across the county. "I may have my opinions about Wyatt's finances," Vivian said, "but I don't want to see you fail. Women help each other out here. It's not kindness. It's how we survive." "Thank you, Mrs. Cartwright." "Vivian, and don't thank me yet. That first winter's going to test you in ways you can't imagine." She paused at the door. "But I think you might be stubborn enough to make it through." Sunday morning. Clear. Hot. Addie in her brown dress with her mother's cameo at her throat, the only piece of her old life coming into the new one. Delia walked her to the church, squeezing her arm hard enough to leave marks. The church was full. Word had spread. Edmund sat in the back with Louisa, who looked miserable and enormous with pregnancy. He wouldn't meet Addie's eyes. Louisa glanced at her once, a look so complicated, so full of things unsaid, that Addie almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Wyatt stood at the altar in a clean shirt and polished boots. When he saw Addie, his face did that thing again. The crack in the calm, the flash of everything underneath before he pulled it back. But this time he let it stay a beat longer. Relief. Gratitude. Something that might eventually become more. Reverend Holt kept it short. No fairy tales, no poetry. Just plain words about partnership and commitment and the hard work of building a life together. Wyatt's vows were his own. "I promise to be honest with you, to work beside you, to respect your partnership and your independence. I promise to share the burdens and the victories. I will not abandon you in hardship. I will not take credit for your labor. I will tell you the truth even when it's hard, and I will listen when you do the same. We build this together, or not at all." Addie's eyes burned. These weren't Edmund's beautiful lies. These were plain, rough-cut, real as the calluses on Wyatt's hands. "I promise to work beside you with honesty and effort," she said. "I promise to learn what I don't know and admit when I need help. I promise to stay when things get difficult, to talk instead of running, to build what we've agreed to build with everything I've got. I'll be your partner in truth, not just in name." Simple gold bands. Wyatt had bought them with money he couldn't spare, and Addie felt that sacrifice like a weight on her finger. Not heavy, but serious, permanent. The kiss was brief, gentle, a promise more than a passion. Outside, people gathered. Most were kind. A few were skeptical. Vivian Cartwright nodded once, approval as understated as the woman herself. Harold Perkins was grinning ear to ear. Delia cried openly and didn't care who saw. Edmund and Louisa slipped out before it ended. Addie watched them go and felt nothing but the clean, sharp edge of a door, closing forever. Wyatt's wagon was loaded with supplies and her few possessions. They said goodbye to Delia, who hugged Addie so hard her ribs ached, and whispered, "You write to me. Every week. I mean it." Then they were riding north, away from town, toward the ranch that was now her home. The silence between them wasn't heavy or awkward. It was the silence of two people who'd said everything that needed saying and were content to sit with what came next. "Are you scared?" Wyatt asked as the ranch came into view. "Terrified," Addie said, "but also ready." "Yeah." He looked at her, and for the first time she saw him smile. Not the ghost of a smile, not the twitch at the corner of his mouth, but a real one that reached his eyes and changed his whole face. "Me too." He carried her carpet bag to the second room, cleaned out, furnished with a simple bed and a washstand and hooks for her clothes. He'd done this himself, she realized. Prepared a space for her. Made room. "Figured you'd want your own space," he said from the doorway. "At least for now." "Thank you, Wyatt." "I'll start supper. You settle in." Addie unpacked slowly, hung her dresses, set out her sewing kit, placed her mother's photograph on the washstand and her mother's Bible beside it. Through the wall, she could hear Wyatt in the kitchen. The clatter of pans, the scrape of the stove door, the smell of coffee. This was her life. This cabin. This man. This enormous, terrifying, beautiful stretch of Texas sky. She was Mrs. Wyatt Callahan, partner in a struggling ranch, wife to a man she'd known for 4 days who carried a war inside him and $800 of debt on his back. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Adelaide Mercer, Adelaide Callahan, felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The first morning, Addie burned the coffee so bad Wyatt had to dump it in the yard. The second morning, she got it right. By the fifth morning, she could make it with her eyes half shut in the dark while Wyatt fed the stove, and neither of them had to say a word about who did what. It just happened. Like two people learning a dance they'd never been taught. The days bled into each other. Brutal, honest, relentless. Addie's hands cracked and bled until they calloused over. Her back screamed every night until her muscles hardened enough to stop complaining. The wood stove burned her forearms twice before she learned to respect its temper, and the chickens pecked her fingers raw before they decided she was worth tolerating. She fixed the garden first, cut back the water on the tomatoes, relocated the beans near the chicken coop, worked the soil with her bare hands until it was loose enough to breathe. Within a week, the plants lifted their heads. Within 2, the tomatoes were producing. Wyatt stood at the garden fence one evening and stared at the green like a man witnessing something he hadn't dared to believe. "How'd you do that?" he asked. "I listened to the dirt." Addie wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist. "My mother used to say plants tell you exactly what they need. You just have to pay attention." They were learning each other the same way, slowly, carefully, paying attention to signals that weren't always spoken out loud. Addie learned that Wyatt's silence came in 2 kinds. The first was comfortable, the silence of a man who didn't waste words, who could sit on the porch after supper and watch the sky change color without needing to fill the air. She liked that silence. It felt like trust. The second kind was different, heavier. It came without warning, a shift behind his eyes, a tightening in his jaw, a withdrawal so complete it was like watching a door close from the inside. The first time it happened, 10 days into their marriage, Addie made the mistake of pushing. "Wyatt, what's wrong?" Nothing. He was standing at the window, his coffee going cold in his hand, staring at something she couldn't see. His breathing was too controlled, too measured, like a man counting to keep himself from drowning. "Wyatt, talk to me." "Not now." 2 words, barely audible. Then he set the coffee down, walked out the front door, saddled Copper, and rode out toward the north pasture without looking back. He was gone 7 hours. Addie fed the animals, worked the garden, made supper, and sat on the porch watching the sun go down with her hands clenched in her lap. By the time she heard hoofbeats in the dark, she'd cycled through worry, anger, hurt, and back to worry so many times she didn't know which one was real anymore. Wyatt put Copper in the barn, came inside, looked at the plate she'd kept warm for him. Then he looked at her. "It wasn't you," he said. His voice was raw, scraped clean. "Thunderstorm last night. The sound of it, sometimes the sound takes me back. I needed to ride it out. I should have told you before I left. I'm sorry." "Are you okay now?" "Getting there." "Then eat. The food's still warm." He sat down, picked up his fork, put it down again. "You're not angry?" "I was. For about 2 hours I was furious. Then I remembered what you told me in that saloon. That you'd try. That trying was the most honest answer you had." Addie pushed the plate closer. "You came back. You told me what it was. That's enough for tonight." "It might not always be enough." "Then we'll figure out what is. Together. That was the deal." He ate. She sat across from him, not talking, just being there. When he finished, he reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Brief, tight, the grip of a man holding on to something he was terrified of losing. They didn't talk about it again that night. But something had shifted. A wall that had been between them, invisible, careful, necessary, had developed its first real crack. The rhythm found them again. Morning chores, separate work, shared meals, evening rest. Ruth McCready rode over from the neighboring ranch, a woman built like rawhide and steel, with a handshake that could crack walnuts. "So you're the one," Ruth said, looking Addie up and down without pretense. "Heard Wyatt finally found somebody stubborn enough to match him." "I don't know about matching him. I'm still trying to keep the chickens from staging a revolt." Ruth laughed, a sound like gravel in a tin can. "Give it a month. They'll fall in line or end up in a pot. Either way, you win." She'd brought sourdough starter, wrapped in cloth like a gift more precious than gold. "Keep it fed. You'll never need store yeast again." Also brought you this. A folded paper, handwritten. "My recipe for preserving tomatoes. Yours are going to come in fast once they start, and you'll lose half of them if you're not ready." "Thank you, Ruth." Don't thank me. Help me mend my south fence next Tuesday, and we're square." Ruth glanced toward the barn where Wyatt was working. "He looks different, you know, since you came. Less like a man carrying the world solo. More like a man who finally put half of it down." Addie held that observation close, turned it over in the quiet moments. She'd started noticing it too. Wyatt talking more at meals, asking about her day, once even laughing out loud when one of the chickens chased her across the yard. Small things, real things. The architecture of trust being built one brick at a time. Then Silas Breckenridge came, and everything nearly burned to the ground. It was a cold Tuesday morning in November. Addie was pulling the last of the season's beans when she heard horses, 3 of them, moving fast, coming from the south road. She straightened, shading her eyes, and her stomach dropped through the dirt when she recognized the lead rider. She'd never met Silas Breckenridge, but she knew him by description. Delia had made sure of that. Big man, expensive clothes, sat his horse like he owned every inch of ground it walked on. Wyatt came out of the barn. His whole body changed, shoulders squaring, hands going still at his sides. That battlefield stillness that meant he was calculating distance and threat and options all at once. "Breckenridge," Wyatt said when the 3 riders pulled up. His voice was flat, controlled. The voice he used when the other kind of silence was trying to pull him under. "Callahan." Silas Breckenridge didn't dismount. He looked down from his horse with the easy confidence of a man who'd never been told no by anyone who mattered. His gaze swept the property, the cabin, the barn, the garden, the corrals, and settled on Addie with undisguised assessment. "So this is the Boston girl who got herself jilted and married the nearest warm body." Wyatt took one step forward. Just one. But the 2 men flanking Breckenridge shifted in their saddles. One of them had a gun on his hip, his hand resting on it with practiced ease. "You're on my land, Breckenridge. Say what you came to say and leave, neighborly as always." Breckenridge's smile was the kind that never reached his eyes. "I came to discuss your mortgage, Callahan. My mortgage is between me and the bank." "Was between you and the bank." Breckenridge reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. "I bought your note last month. Perfectly legal. The bank was happy to offload a risky loan, and I was happy to acquire it. Which means, Wyatt, that I now hold your future in my hands." The world tilted. Addie saw it happen, saw the color drain from Wyatt's face, saw his hands clench into fists so tight the tendons stood out like ropes, saw the flicker of something behind his eyes that wasn't anger. It was fear. The raw, grinding fear of a man who'd spent 2 years clawing his way out of a hole, only to feel the ground open up again beneath his feet. "You can't call the mortgage," Wyatt said. His voice was dangerously quiet. "I'm current on every payment." "Oh, I won't call it. Not today." Breckenridge folded the document and tucked it away. "But I could. Anytime I decide you're a risk. Anytime I think this property isn't meeting standards. Mortgages have all sorts of clauses for that, Callahan. Your father signed a contract full of them." "My father signed a lot of things he shouldn't have." "Yes, he did. And now you're living with the consequences." Breckenridge's gaze swung back to Addie. "Mrs. Callahan, I wonder if your husband told you exactly how precarious your situation is. One bad season, one failed payment, one clause triggered, and everything you see here, the cabin, the land, those cattle out there, belongs to me." "Get off our property." Addie's voice came out before she decided to speak. Flat, hard. The voice of a woman who'd been pushed past the point where fear turned into something sharper. "You've made your threat. You've had your fun. Now go." Breckenridge's eyebrows rose. The adults are talking, Mrs. Callahan.
And I'm telling you to leave. This is our home, not yours. Not yet. Not ever. Addie stepped forward until she was standing next to Wyatt, shoulder to shoulder, close enough that she could feel him shaking. Not with fear anymore, but with the effort of holding back the kind of rage that, once released, wouldn't stop. You want to play games with legal documents? You'd do it through a lawyer and a courtroom. But you don't ride onto our land and threaten us like we're tenants who owe you rent. Girl, you don't know what you're— Try me. Addie's chin came up. She'd stared down Edmund Hale in front of a whole town. She'd burned his letters and buried his lies. She'd married a stranger, moved to the middle of nowhere, and learned to run a household from nothing. She was not going to be intimidated by a rich man on a tall horse. This is our land, our home, and you've got about 30 seconds to turn those horses around before my husband and I make you wish you had. Silence, the kind that rings. Breckenridge stared at her, and Addie stared back, and for a long, stretched moment, the only sound was the wind and the horses breathing. You're making a mistake, Breckenridge said finally. Both of you. I'm offering a way out before winter comes and breaks you. We'll take our chances. Wyatt's hand found Addie's, closed around it. His voice was steady again. She'd given him the time he needed to pull the rage back, to lock it down, to become the controlled, careful man she'd married, instead of the one the war had tried to make him. You heard my wife. Get off our land. Breckenridge's jaw tightened. He turned his horse. The two men followed. At the top of the ridge, he paused and looked back. Spring, Callahan. Let's see if you and your Boston bride survive that long. When you come crawling, my price goes down. They watched the dust settle. Wyatt's hand was crushing hers, but Addie didn't pull away. She squeezed back just as hard. Did you know? She asked quietly. About the mortgage?
No. His voice shook. I had no idea. Addie, that's everything. He owns our debt. He can threaten us any time he wants, find any excuse to call it due.
Can he? Really? If we're current on payments, if the property's maintained, can he actually force a foreclosure?
There are clauses. My father's contract. I never read every line of it. I should have. God, I should have.
Then we need someone who can read every line.
Addie turned him to face her. His eyes were wild, the controlled calm shattered, and she could see it. The boy who'd watched his father gamble everything away. The soldier who'd survived a war only to come home to ruin. The man who'd rebuilt alone and was now watching it all threatened again.
Wyatt, look at me. We need a lawyer.
I can't afford a lawyer.
We can't afford not to have one. Who's the best in the area? The most honest?
Nathaniel Cross, Fredericksburg.
He's good, but—
Then we go to Fredericksburg, tomorrow. We take every document you have, the mortgage contract, the payment records, everything, and we let him tell us exactly where we stand. She gripped his arms hard.
This is not your father's story, Wyatt. You are not going to lose this ranch. We are not going to lose this ranch. Do you hear me?
Something broke open in his face. Not the war breaking. Something else. Something newer, more fragile. The expression of a man who'd been carrying a weight alone for so long, he'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone grab the other end.
How are you this strong?
He asked roughly. 4 months ago, you were a seamstress in Boston. Now you're staring down the most powerful man in 3 counties and talking about lawyers and legal strategy.
4 months ago, I let a man's pretty letters convince me to cross a continent. I'm done being the woman who trusts words. I want to be the woman who fights.
Addie's voice cracked, but she didn't look away.
This is my home too now. My garden,
my chickens, my kitchen with a stove that hates me. I didn't come all this way and work this hard to let some bully in expensive boots take it from us." Wyatt pulled her into his arms. Not gentle, hard, desperate. The embrace of a man clinging to the only solid thing in a world that kept shifting under his feet. Addie held on just as tight. She could feel his heart hammering against hers, could feel the tremor in his muscles that meant the war was pulling at him, and he was fighting it back with everything he had. "Together," she said into his chest. "Together," he said into her hair. They stood like that for a long time. The wind blew, the cattle lowed in the distance, the chickens clucked around their feet like nothing in the world had changed. That night, neither of them went to their separate rooms. They lay together in Wyatt's bed, fully clothed, holding each other in the dark. Not passion, survival. The need to know the other person was there, was real, wasn't going anywhere. "I'm scared, Addie," Wyatt said in the darkness. The first time he'd admitted it without her asking. "Not of Breckenridge. Of failing you. Of watching you work this hard and then losing everything because my father signed a piece of paper I never bothered to read." "You won't fail me." "You don't know that." "No, but I know you. 4 months isn't long, but it's long enough to know what a man's made of. You're made of the same thing this land is, stubborn and hard and too damn proud to quit." She found his hand in the dark. "We ride to Fredericksburg tomorrow. We find out what Breckenridge can and can't do. And then we fight." "And if we can't win?" "Then we go down swinging, Wyatt, together, all the way to the ground." He was quiet for a long time. Then his grip on her hand tightened, and he said something he'd never said before. Something she hadn't expected and wasn't prepared for. Something that changed the shape of everything between them in a single breath. "I love you, Addie." It came out rough, almost angry, like the words had been locked behind a door he'd sworn never to open, and the hinges had finally rusted through. "I don't know when it happened," he continued, his voice breaking at the edges. "I didn't want it to happen. I told myself this was business, partnership, 2 people making a practical arrangement. But you stood in my garden and told me I was drowning my tomatoes, and you burned the coffee and laughed about it, and you held my hand when I couldn't talk, and didn't make me feel broken for it. And somewhere in the middle of all that, He stopped, swallowed hard. "You don't have to say it back. I just needed you to know. Before tomorrow, before whatever comes next, I needed you to know that this stopped being a business arrangement for me a long time ago." Addie's eyes were burning. Her throat was so tight she could barely breathe. She thought about Edmund's letters. Beautiful, polished, full of words designed to make her feel exactly what he wanted her to feel. And she thought about Wyatt, lying in the dark, terrified, fighting a war and a bully, and his own locked-down heart, saying the truest thing he'd ever said, with a voice that could barely get the words out. "I love you too," she said. "I think I have since you picked up my carpet bag off that street and didn't ask for anything in return." He kissed her. Not the brief, formal kiss from their wedding. Not a kiss of partnership or practical arrangement. A real kiss. Raw, desperate, tasting of fear and salt and the fierce, stubborn refusal to let go of something worth keeping. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Wyatt pressed his forehead against hers. "We ride at first light," he said. "First light," she agreed. And they held each other through the rest of that long, dark, terrifying night. While somewhere to the south, Silas Breckenridge sat in his big house on his big ranch, had calculated the price of other people's lives, never suspecting that the woman he'd dismissed as a timid city girl was already loading every weapon she had. They rode out before the sun cleared the hills, Wyatt on Copper and Addie on Duke, the big workhorse who moved like a rocking chair and didn't care about speed. Wyatt had packed every document he owned: the mortgage contract, 2 years of payment receipts, his father's original deed, and a ledger of every dollar he'd spent and earned since taking over the ranch. Addie carried it all in a saddlebag she'd reinforced with double stitching the night before, because if these papers were their ammunition, she wasn't losing a single round to a busted seam. 8 miles to Cottonwood. They stopped at Delia's first. Delia took one look at their faces and didn't ask a single question. She just opened the door wider and put coffee on. When Wyatt explained about Breckenridge buying the mortgage, Delia's expression went from concerned to furious in the time it takes to strike a match. "That snake," she said, "that calculating, land-grabbing snake. He's been doing this for years, buying up struggling properties, squeezing people out, taking their land for pennies. I watched him do it to the Harpers, to old man Jennings. Nobody fights back because nobody can afford to." "We're going to afford to," Addie said. "We're riding to Fredericksburg today. Nathaniel Cross." "Good. Cross is honest, and he's mean in a courtroom, but Fredericksburg is a full day's ride." Delia was already pulling food from her shelves. "You'll need to stay overnight. I'll pack provisions, and I'll send word to Ruth McCready to check your animals while you're gone." "Delia, we can't ask." "You didn't ask. I offered. There's a difference, and we don't have time to argue about it." Delia shoved a wrapped bundle of food into Addie's hands. "Now go, and when you get back, come here first. I've got some ideas of my own." They rode hard. Addie's thighs burned, and her back ached, and Duke's steady gait felt like it would rattle her teeth loose. But she didn't complain, and she didn't slow down. Wyatt checked on her every hour without making it obvious. A glance, a slight adjustment in pace, a question about water that was really a question about whether she could keep going. "I'm fine, Wyatt." "Didn't say you weren't." "You were thinking it." "I was thinking you've never ridden 8 hours straight, and I don't want you falling off and breaking something we can't afford to fix." "I'm not going to fall off, Duke. Duke wouldn't let me. He's the most responsible member of this family." Wyatt almost smiled. Almost. Fredericksburg appeared late in the afternoon. Bigger than Cottonwood, busier, full of German settlers whose buildings had a solidity that made everything back home look temporary. Nathaniel Cross's office was above a general store, and the man himself was exactly what Addie needed him to be. Mid-40s, sharp-eyed, ink-stained, with the focused intensity of a dog that had found a bone and intended to keep it. He listened to everything without interrupting, read the mortgage contract word by word, so slowly Addie wanted to scream. Made notes in handwriting so small it looked like ant tracks. When they finished, he leaned back and tapped his pen against his teeth. "Breckenridge," he said. "I know his methods. He's done this before. Buys distressed mortgages, pressures owners, consolidates properties. Usually he's after water rights or railroad access." "Railroad?" Wyatt frowned. "There's no railroad near us." "Not yet." Cross pulled a map from a drawer, unfolded it across his desk. "But there's been talk, quiet talk, the kind that doesn't show up in newspapers, about a proposed line from Austin to San Antonio through the western route. If that happens, every piece of land along that corridor becomes worth 10 times what it is now." Addie's pulse quickened. "And our ranch is on that corridor?" "Possibly. I'd need to check the survey routes, but your water rights to Jessup Creek would be particularly valuable to a railroad. They need water for steam engines, for construction camps, for everything." Cross looked up from the map. "If Breckenridge knows about this route before it's public, and a man on the county planning commission certainly would, he could buy up every property along the corridor at current prices, then sell to the railroad at a massive profit." "Is that legal?" Wyatt's voice was hard. "The land buying? Yes. Using insider knowledge from a public commission to manipulate land values? No. And if he's been influencing the route selection itself, that's corruption at the state level. Can he foreclose on us? Addie asked. Right now, today, with the contract he holds? Cross flipped through his notes. The contract your father signed has several clauses that allow foreclosure beyond simple non-payment. Property deterioration, failure to maintain improvements, perceived risk to investment value. Perceived is the key word. It's subjective. If you're maintaining the property well and making payments on time, he'd have a hard time proving cause. Cross paused. Hard. Not impossible. With the right judge and enough money, Breckenridge could manufacture a case. Then what do we do? Wyatt's hands were flat on his knees, the same way they'd been flat on the saloon table the night he'd told Addie about the war. Anchoring himself. 3 things. Cross held up fingers. First, I review this contract until I know every clause he could exploit, and we systematically close every vulnerability. Second, you get an independent property assessment. A professional who'll document that your ranch is well maintained and improving. That takes away his strongest argument. Third, Cross smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. We find out exactly what he's after and why. If it's the railroad, we have leverage. Because men who use public positions for private profit tend to get very nervous when other people start asking questions. How much? Wyatt asked. Cross named a price. Addie watched Wyatt's jaw tighten, watched him calculate money they didn't have against a future they couldn't afford to lose. We'll find it, Addie said before Wyatt could speak. Do it. They stayed the night at a boarding house that charged too much for thin walls and hard beds. Neither of them slept much. They lay in the narrow bed together, talking through everything Cross had said, making plans, running numbers. The jewelry, Addie said. Edmund's passage gift. The pearl pendant and earrings. I never sold them. They're not worth much, but they'll cover Cross's retainer. That's your money, your safety net. My safety net is you, Wyatt, and this ranch, and every jar of tomatoes, and every egg those chickens lay, and every fence post we've mended together. I don't need Edmund Hale's pearls to feel safe. She found his hand in the dark. I need us to win. Morning. Hard ride back to Cottonwood. Addie sold the jewelry to a jeweler who paid half what they were worth. She counted the money twice, folded it carefully, and felt nothing but relief. The last piece of Edmund Hale, gone. Converted into ammunition for the fight that mattered. At Delia's boarding house, they found a war council waiting. Delia had been busy. Sitting around her kitchen table were Reverend Holt, Harold Perkins, and, to Addie's shock, Vivian Cartwright, ramrod straight in charcoal silk, looking like a general who'd come to plan an invasion. Sit down, Delia said. We've been talking. About what? Wyatt asked, still standing, his body tense with the suspicion of a man who wasn't used to people gathering on his behalf. About Silas Breckenridge and the fact that someone needs to stop him before he swallows every small ranch in this county. Vivian's voice was crisp as a January morning. My husband handles Breckenridge's banking. I convinced him to review certain records. Discreetly. Vivian, Reverend Holt started. Don't Vivian me, Samuel. I know exactly what I'm doing. She turned to Wyatt and Addie. Breckenridge has been buying properties along a very specific corridor for 2 years. Your ranch is one of the last pieces he needs. Railroad, Addie said. Every head turned to her. Our lawyer figured it out. A proposed line, Austin to San Antonio, western route. Breckenridge knows about it from his seat on the County Planning Commission. He's buying up the corridor before the route goes public. Vivian's eyebrows rose. Your lawyer is Nathaniel Cross? Yes. Good. He's the right man for this. Vivian pulled an envelope from her bag. My husband found something else. Meeting minutes from the Planning Commission. Breckenridge has been pushing for the western route over 2 alternatives. One of those alternatives would have been cheaper and faster to build, but it doesn't cross any land Breckenridge owns. That's corruption, Reverend Holt said quietly. Using a public office to direct public infrastructure for private profit. It's more than corruption, Harold Perkins leaned forward. If the State Railroad Commission finds out, it'll trigger an investigation. Breckenridge could lose his commission seat, face fines, maybe worse. And if every landowner along that corridor finds out about the railroad before Breckenridge finishes buying them out? Delia's smile was sharp enough to cut wire. His whole scheme falls apart. Land prices go up, nobody sells to him. He's left holding a bunch of overpriced mortgages on properties he can't profit from. Wyatt had been listening without moving. Now he spoke, and his voice was careful, measured. The voice of a man thinking 3 moves ahead. You're talking about going to war with the most powerful man in the county. Every person in this room could get hurt. He's got money, connections, lawyers who'll bury us in paperwork. He's also got a secret he can't afford to have exposed, Vivian said. And secrets are expensive to keep, Wyatt. Much more expensive than whatever he's spending on lawyers. Why? Wyatt looked at each of them in turn. Why would you do this? Risk your businesses, your reputations. Addie and we're nobody. We've been married 4 months. We can barely keep our ranch running. Because Marcus Breckenridge destroyed the Harper family, Delia said, and her voice went low and rough. Because he took old man Jennings's land for 1/3 of its value, and Jennings died 6 months later with nothing. Because my husband and I nearly lost this boarding house to men exactly like him, and I swore if I ever got the chance to fight back, I would. Because it's right, Reverend Holt added simply, and because your wife stood up to him on your front porch when she had every reason to be afraid, and that kind of courage deserves to be supported. Vivian smoothed her gloves. And because my daughter loved you once, Wyatt, and you deserved better than what happened. I didn't help then. I'm helping now. The kitchen went quiet. Addie watched Wyatt process this. The offer of community from people he'd kept at arm's length for years. The realization that he'd been so busy being alone that he'd missed the fact that he didn't have to be. Okay, he said finally. His voice was thick. Okay, what's the plan? The plan came together in pieces over the following week. Cross worked the legal angle, reviewing the mortgage contract, identifying every exploitable clause, preparing defenses. He recommended an independent property assessor, a woman named Margaret Ford, who'd been evaluating ranches for 20 years and had a reputation for being impossible to bribe or intimidate. Addie and Wyatt spent 2 frantic days preparing for Ford's visit. Every fence mended, every building patched, every animal groomed, fed, healthy. Addie organized the pantry until the jars of preserved vegetables stood in rows straight enough to satisfy a military inspector. She scrubbed the cabin floor on her hands and knees, polished the windows, fixed the broken spindle on the chair that had been waiting for repair since before she arrived. Margaret Ford spent 6 hours on the property. She checked everything: the structural integrity of every building, the condition of every fence, the health of every animal, the state of the garden, the quality of the water. She asked Addie detailed questions about household management, food preservation, supply planning. She examined the account books Addie had started keeping, every dollar tracked, every expense justified. Mrs. Callahan, Ford said as she finished, writing her final notes with precise, unhurried strokes. I've assessed over 200 properties in my career. This is one of the best maintained operations I've encountered. particularly for a two-person outfit. Your husband's livestock management is sound, and your household organization is exceptional. We built it together, Addie said. Equal partners. My report will reflect that. Mr. Breckenridge will find it extremely difficult to argue property deterioration with this documentation. Ford paused. I should tell you, I know what he's doing. I've seen it before. Men like him count on people being too tired and too scared to fight back. The fact that you're fighting matters. Meanwhile, Reverend Holt traveled to the state capitol. He had contacts there, men in positions that mattered, men who took a dim view of public officials using their offices for personal enrichment. He returned with news that the Railroad Commission had opened a quiet investigation into the Western route selection process. Breckenridge didn't know yet, but the wheels were turning. And Delia, steady, practical, connected Delia, worked her network of gossip and information until every landowner along the proposed railroad corridor knew exactly what their land might be worth. Families who'd been considering Breckenridge's buyout offers suddenly stopped returning his letters. Land prices began to shift. The corridor that Breckenridge needed to control was slipping through his fingers one stubborn rancher at a time. The confrontation came on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after Breckenridge's first visit. Addie was hanging laundry when she heard horses. She didn't need to look to know who it was. She pulled her hands from the wash water, dried them on her apron, and walked to stand beside Wyatt, who'd already come out of the barn. Breckenridge had brought his lawyer this time, a thin man named Prescott, with the oiled smile of someone who'd sold his conscience years ago and didn't miss it. Mr. Callahan, Mrs. Callahan, Prescott dismounted first, carrying a leather case. My client has reviewed your situation and has serious concerns about the property's viability as collateral for the mortgage he holds. He's prepared to initiate foreclosure proceedings unless we have an independent assessment completed last week. Wyatt's voice was calm, steady, the battle voice, but without the darkness behind it. He handed over Ford's report, 16 pages, detailed, professional, devastating to Breckenridge's argument. This property is certified as excellently maintained and improving in value. We're current on every mortgage payment. We've violated no terms of any contract. Prescott's face changed as he scanned the pages. The oiled confidence cracked. You should have consulted us before. We consulted our own lawyer. Addie stepped forward. Nathaniel Cross, from Fredericksburg. Perhaps you know him. She watched that name land. Prescott knew Cross. His face said everything his mouth wouldn't. This doesn't change anything, Breckenridge said from his horse, but his voice had lost its smooth edges. I can still foreclose on a property that's been certified as excellently maintained by a 20-year veteran assessor? A new voice, behind them. Addie turned, and there was Cross himself, walking up from the south road where he'd tied his horse, timing his entrance like a man who understood that courtrooms and battlefields had something in common. The importance of showing up at exactly the right moment. I'd love to see you try that in front of a judge, Mr. Breckenridge, Cross continued, his voice pleasant in the way a knife is pleasant when it's still in the sheath. The legal fees alone would be significant, and you'd almost certainly lose. Bad precedent for your other holdings. Now see here! No, you see here. Cross stopped walking. His pleasantness vanished. My clients are in full compliance with every term of their mortgage. Any attempt to foreclose would constitute harassment. And speaking of legal difficulties, he paused, let the silence build, let Breckenridge feel it coming. I understand the State Railroad Commission has taken a keen interest in certain land acquisitions along a proposed western route. Something about a county planning commissioner who may have used his position to influence route selection for personal financial gain. Breckenridge went white. Not pale, white. the color of a man watching his foundation crack. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, but the bluster was gone. Every syllable shook. "Of course you don't. Just like you don't know that every landowner along that corridor has stopped selling. Just like you don't know that the commission seat you've held for 9 years is currently under formal review." Cross pulled a document from his coat. "This is a cease and desist letter regarding any further attempts to threaten, coerce, or intimidate my clients. You'll also find a summary of the evidence we've compiled regarding your land acquisition patterns, your voting record on the Planning Commission, and several very interesting discrepancies between your public statements and your private purchases." "You can't prove any of this." "I don't need to prove it. The state investigators will handle that part. I just need to make sure my clients are protected while they do their work." Cross smiled. It was not a warm smile. "I'd recommend you consult your own attorney, Mr. Breckenridge. You're going to need one. Several, probably." Prescott was already backing toward his horse, the leather case clutched to his chest like a shield. Breckenridge sat frozen on his mount, his face cycling through rage, disbelief, calculation, and something Addie hadn't expected. Fear. Real fear. The fear of a man who'd built an empire on intimidation and was discovering, for the first time, what it felt like to be on the other side. "You think you've won," Breckenridge said. His voice was quiet now. Dangerous. "I think we've defended our home," Addie answered. She was standing straight. Her hands were still. Her voice didn't waver. "That's all we ever wanted. That's all any of us wanted. The Harpers, the Jennings, every family you've squeezed and threatened and pushed off their land. We just wanted to keep what's ours." "You've made an enemy." "No, Mr. Breckenridge. We've made friends. People who believe in fairness and community and the idea that one man doesn't get to own everything just because he's got more money than conscience." Addie took a breath. "That's worth more than anything you've got." Breckenridge stared at her for a long, terrible moment. Then he turned his horse and rode away without another word. Prescott scrambled after him. The dust rose and settled, and they were gone. Wyatt hadn't moved. Addie turned to him. His eyes were bright. His jaw was clenched so hard she could see the muscle jumping. But he wasn't shaking, wasn't disappearing into the silent place where the war lived. He was right here, present, whole. "Is it over?" she asked Cross. "The immediate threat, yes. He can't foreclose. There's no grounds, and he knows it. The investigation will keep him busy, probably cost him the commission seat, definitely cost him money. He might try smaller harassments, but legally, he's done." Cross tucked his papers away. "For what it's worth, Mrs. Callahan, I've been practicing law for 20 years. I've never seen anyone stand up to a man like Breckenridge the way you just did." "I've had practice," Addie said, "getting knocked down by powerful men. Turns out, the getting back up part gets easier every time." Cross left. Addie and Wyatt stood alone in the quiet that followed, the enormous, ringing silence of a battle won. The cattle lowed, the chickens scratched. The wind moved through the grass the same way it had moved through it before Breckenridge came and after he left, indifferent to the wars of small people on its land. "We did it," Wyatt said. His voice sounded like it belonged to someone who'd just set down a weight he'd been carrying for years. "We did it." Addie took his hand. "All of us. Delia, Vivian, Harold, the Reverend, Ruth, Cross. All of us." "But you," Wyatt turned to her. "You stood there and looked him in the eye and didn't flinch. You organized the assessment, the lawyer, the whole defense. You sold Edmund's jewelry to pay for it. I did what partners do. You did what nobody's ever done for me." His voice cracked. Not with sadness, with something bigger, something that had been locked in his chest since a girl named Sarah sent a letter instead of saying goodbye. You stayed. You fought. When every smart, safe, logical choice was to take the $200 and go back east, you planted your feet on this ground and refused to move. This ground is mine too, Wyatt. That's what you offered me on that street. Not just a roof. Not just a partnership. A place to stand.
Addie felt tears on her cheeks and didn't bother wiping them.
I've never had that before. I wasn't going to let anyone take it away. He kissed her, right there in the yard, in full daylight, in front of the chickens and the horses and God, and anyone else who cared to watch. Kissed her like a man who'd finally stopped being afraid that the good things would be taken away. Kissed her like the future was something to run toward, instead of something to brace against. When they separated, Addie laughed, really laughed, for the first time in so long that the sound startled them both. "What?" Wyatt asked. "I was just thinking about Edmund Hale, about what he'd say if he could see me now, covered in dust, smelling like laundry soap and chicken feed, standing in front of a 2-room cabin I helped patch with my own hands." She wiped her eyes. He wanted a refined wife, a decoration, something pretty to put in his parlor. His loss. Wyatt pulled her close. My gain. Our gain, Addie corrected. Everything we have, everything we built, everything we just fought for, it belongs to both of us equally. That was the deal. That was the deal, Wyatt agreed, and he smiled at her. A real smile. Open and unguarded. The rarest thing he had to give. Best deal I ever made. That evening they sat on the porch they'd repaired together, watching the sun go down over land that was still theirs, that would remain theirs. Addie leaned against Wyatt's shoulder. His arm went around her, easy and natural, the gesture of a man who'd finally learned that holding on to someone didn't make you weak. "Wyatt?" "Yeah?" "The 6 months are up next week." "I know." "I don't want a trial period anymore. I don't want an exit clause or escape money or any arrangement that has an ending built into it. I want this to be permanent, real. No more safety nets." He was quiet for a moment. Then he pressed his lips against the top of her head. "Mrs. Callahan, I burned that exit clause in my head about 2 months ago. I just didn't want to scare you by saying so." "You're not going to scare me, Wyatt. I married a man who fights wars in his sleep and argues with chickens and can't grow a tomato to save his life. Nothing scares me anymore. I don't argue with the chickens. I negotiate with them. There's a difference." "There really isn't." He laughed, low and quiet, almost rusty from disuse, but real. The sound of it spread across the evening air, and mixed with the wind and the distant cattle, and all the ordinary precious sounds of a life they'd built, from nothing but stubbornness, honesty, and the refusal to break. Winter hit 3 days after Breckenridge's retreat, and it hit like it had a personal grudge against every living thing in Texas. The temperature dropped so fast, Addie woke up one morning to find ice on the inside of the windows, and her breath hanging in clouds above the quilt. Wyatt was already up. Already dressed. Already stoking the fire with the focused intensity of a man who understood that cold killed more cattle than any disease or predator ever could. "How bad?" Addie asked, pulling on every layer she owned. "Bad enough. We need to check the herd. If any of them are caught in the low ground near the creek, the water could freeze around their legs." He was pulling on his heaviest coat, his jaw tight. "I need to ride out." "I'll handle the animals here. Chickens, pigs, horses. I'll get them fed and watered and keep the stove going." She was already moving, already calculating. "How much hay do we have left?" Enough. Barely. If this breaks in a week, we'll be fine. If it holds longer than that... He didn't finish. Then we'll figure it out. Go. He went. Addie worked through the morning in cold that made her fingers clumsy and her lungs burn. The chickens huddled together, indignant and confused. The pigs buried themselves in straw. The horses stamped and blew, their breath making clouds in the barn's dim air. She fed them all, broke the ice on the water troughs, hauled extra straw for bedding, and checked every door and window for drafts that could steal the heat they couldn't afford to lose. By noon, Wyatt hadn't returned. Addie stood on the porch, scanning the white-gray horizon, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that went cold in minutes. She didn't let herself worry. Worry was a luxury they couldn't afford, same as wasted hay and cracked windows. He came back at 2, riding slow, Copper's sides heaving. "Lost 2," he said before he'd even dismounted. His voice was flat, numb. "Found them in the ravine near the south fence. Cold got them overnight. Couldn't have been dead more than a few hours. 2 head of cattle. At current prices, that was nearly $100 they'd never see." Addie felt it like a punch, but she kept her face steady. "The rest? Moved them to the sheltered ground east of the barn. They're bunched up, staying warm. If we can keep feeding them through the week, they'll make it." He swung down from Copper, and Addie saw his hands shaking. Not from the cold, or not only from the cold. 2. We couldn't afford to lose 2. We couldn't afford a lot of things that happened anyway. We're still here. Addie took Copper's reins. "Get inside, eat, warm up. I'll stable him." "Addie, inside, Wyatt. You're no good to those cattle or to me if you freeze to death being stubborn about it." He went. She took care of Copper, rubbing the horse down, giving him extra feed, murmuring the kind of nonsense words that animals seem to find comforting, and humans were too proud to need. When she came back inside, Wyatt was sitting at the table with his head in his hands. Not crying, just sitting with the weight of it. She put a bowl of stew in front of him, sat down across from him. Didn't speak, didn't push, just waited. "My father lost 12 head in the winter of '71, Wyatt said finally, without looking up. "I was 16. He got drunk for 3 days and then gambled what was left of the emergency money on a cattle futures scheme that went belly up by spring." His hands dropped from his face. "I swore I'd never be him. And then I lose 2 head, and my first thought is, what if this is how it starts? What if this is the beginning of everything falling apart?" "Your first thought after losing 2 cattle was to ride home and tell me the truth about what happened?" Addie's voice was firm. "Your father's first thought was to find a bottle. That's the difference, Wyatt. That's the whole difference. And it's everything." He looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his expression shifted, the shadow of his father's ghost releasing its grip, just a little, just enough. "When did you get so wise?" he asked quietly. "About the same time I learned to negotiate with chickens," he laughed, short, exhausted, real. Then he ate. The cold held for 9 days. They lost no more cattle, but it was close. A mere thing every single day. Wyatt riding out in brutal conditions to check the herd, while Addie kept the homestead alive. Ruth McCready rode over twice to help, her face raw with windburn, bringing extra feed and the kind of gruff encouragement that passed for affection in ranch country. "You're going to make it," Ruth said on her second visit, watching Addie haul water with hands so chapped they bled through the rags she'd wrapped around them. "You know that, right? This is the worst of it. Every winter after this one will be easier, because you'll know what's coming." "Promise?" "I don't make promises about weather. I'm not that stupid. But I'll tell you this. I've been ranching 20 years, and the ones who survive the first hard winter are the ones who stick. You and Wyatt, you're stickers." The thaw came slow, Then, all at once, ice melting, water running, the world turning from white to brown to the first tentative green. Addie walked through the garden she'd put to bed in the fall, checking the soil, making plans. The tomato beds needed amendment. She wanted to expand the bean rows, add squash, maybe try corn if the soil could handle it. Wyatt found her kneeling in the dirt, drawing planting diagrams with a stick. "Already planning?" "Already planning." She looked up at him. "I want to double the garden this year. We had to buy too much flour and cornmeal over winter. If I can grow more, we spend less, and every dollar we save is a dollar toward paying off the mortgage." "I was thinking the same thing about the cattle. We've got 3 new calves coming this spring. If they're all healthy, we can sell 2 and keep 1 to grow the herd. Plus, I want to look into sheep." "Sheep? Wool's profitable, and sheep can graze land that's too rough for cattle." He crouched beside her, looking at her stick-drawn garden plan. "Ruth said the Brennan place east of her is selling a small flock. Young animals, good stock. If we could scrape together $40... I can earn $40. Addie sat back on her heels. "My sewing. Vivian Cartwright mentioned that the women in town pay good money for quality dressmaking, and there's nobody within 50 miles who can sew like I can. If I took orders when we go to town for church, delivered the finished work the following Sunday..." "You'd be working 7 days a week." "I'm already working 7 days a week. At least this work pays cash." Wyatt studied her face. "You're serious?" "Wyatt, I didn't cross 2,000 miles and survive a Texas winter to stop pushing now. We've got momentum. Breckenridge is off our backs. The mortgage payments are current. We've got a good assessor's report on file. This is the time to grow, not coast." He shook his head slowly, but he was smiling. "You know what Delia told me the day before our wedding?" She said, "That girl is going to run you ragged, Callahan. Best thing that'll ever happen to you." She was right on both counts. Spring exploded across the ranch like something that had been held back too long and couldn't wait anymore. Calves arrived, 3 healthy ones, just as Wyatt had predicted. The garden went in, twice the size of last year's, Addie's hands moving through the soil with confidence she hadn't possessed 6 months ago. The sourdough starter Ruth had given her was thriving, producing bread so good that Addie started baking extra loaves to sell in town alongside her sewing. Nathaniel Cross sent word in April. The state investigation into Breckenridge had resulted in significant fines and his removal from the County Planning Commission. The railroad, now under public scrutiny, had adjusted its proposed route, still coming through the area, but not through Breckenridge's holdings. His land purchases, made at inflated prices based on insider knowledge that was now worthless, had become a financial albatross. "He's not ruined," Cross wrote, "but his power is significantly diminished. More importantly, he'll think twice before targeting small ranchers again." Wyatt read the letter aloud on the porch while Addie shelled peas. When he finished, he folded it carefully and tucked it into his shirt pocket. "It's not justice," he said. "Not completely." "It's accountability," Addie answered. "And it means the next family he thinks about squeezing will have an easier time fighting back. That counts." "Yeah." He was quiet for a moment. "Addie, do you know what I was thinking about this morning, while I was checking the new calves?" "Tell me." "I was thinking that my grandfather stood on the same ground 60 years ago and decided to build something. My father almost destroyed it. I almost lost it. And now..." He looked at her. "Now I'm sitting here with a wife who grows tomatoes like a wizard and argues with chickens, and just helped take down the most powerful man in the county. And I'm thinking, this is what my grandfather meant. This is what building something real looks like. It looks like dirt under my fingernails and a stove that still hates me. It looks like everything I ever wanted and didn't know how to ask for. In May, Addie realized she was pregnant. She knew before any doctor could have told her. Knew the way women know. The subtle shift in her body. The morning nausea that she hid from Wyatt for a week before accepting that hiding things from him was exactly the kind of dishonesty they'd promised never to practice. She told him after supper, sitting on the porch in the long golden light of a Texas evening. Just set it straight. No preamble, no softening. "I'm pregnant, Wyatt." He went still. Not the war stillness, a different kind. The stillness of a man hearing something so enormous, his body forgot how to move. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." "How long?" 2 months, I think. Maybe a little more." His hands gripped the arms of his chair. His knuckles went white. And then his face did something Addie had never seen it do before. It crumbled. Not in sadness. In something so much bigger than sadness or happiness that there wasn't a word for it. His eyes filled. His jaw shook. He pressed his hand over his mouth and made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Wyatt!" He couldn't speak. He reached for her instead, pulling her out of her chair and into his arms, holding her so tight she felt his heartbeat against her ribs. "Are you scared?" she whispered. Terrified. His voice was wrecked. "And happier than I've been in my entire life. Both at the same time. Is that possible?" "That's been our whole marriage." He laughed into her hair. Wet, broken, real. "A baby. Addie, we're going to have a baby." "We are, and I need you to know, I'm scared too. Childbirth out here, this far from a doctor, with everything that can go wrong. We'll get help. Ruth, Delia, a midwife from town, whatever you need." His hands framed her face, tilting it up so he could look at her. His eyes were red but focused. "I will not let anything happen to you. Do you hear me? You and this child are the reason for everything. The ranch, the fight, the whole damn struggle. You're the reason." "We're each other's reason," Abby corrected. "That was the deal." That was the deal. The months that followed tested Addie in new ways. Her body changed, grew heavy and unfamiliar, while the work didn't stop and couldn't stop. She learned to adapt, adjusting how she bent, how she lifted, how she managed the garden and the kitchen, and the endless cycle of feeding and cleaning and preserving. Ruth and Maggie Brennan, the Irish rancher's wife who'd become a close friend, came by regularly, bringing baby clothes and advice and the kind of no-nonsense reassurance that frontier women gave each other because sentimentality was a luxury and practicality saved lives. Delia made the trip from town once a month, fussing over Addie with a ferocity that would have been annoying if it hadn't also been desperately needed. She brought preserved fruits, herbal teas for nausea, and long, detailed instructions for every stage of pregnancy that Addie wrote down and studied like a textbook. "You're going to be fine," Delia told her firmly during one visit, watching Addie rub her aching back. "You've survived Edmund Hale, a Texas winter, and Silas Breckenridge. Childbirth's got nothing on that list." "Childbirth might disagree." "Childbirth doesn't get a vote. You do." Even Vivian Cartwright appeared at the ranch one afternoon in October, riding in a buggy that probably cost more than Wyatt's annual income, carrying a box of baby things her own grandchildren had outgrown. "I'm not here to be sentimental," Vivian announced, setting the box on the porch. "I'm here because I was wrong about you, Adelaide Callahan, and I don't like being wrong without acknowledging it." "Wrong how?" "I told you that Wyatt's burdens would crush the woman standing next to him. I underestimated the woman." Vivian's gaze was steady, almost warm. "You didn't just stand next to him. You stood in front of him when he needed it, and behind him when he didn't. And somehow, You've turned a struggling ranch into something that actually looks like it has a future. I respect that. Thank you, Vivian. Don't thank me. Just raise that child to be as stubborn as both of you, and this county will be in good hands for another generation. The baby came in February.
A girl, born during a cold snap after 12 hours of labor that tested every ounce of strength Addie had left. Ruth was there, steady and unshakable. Delia had come from town the week before, refusing to leave until the baby arrived. The midwife, a quiet woman named Agnes, who delivered half the children in the county, guided them through with calm, practiced hands. Wyatt wore a path in the porch boards, pacing, stopping, pacing again, his hands opening and closing at his sides like he wanted to fight something but couldn't find it. Ruth came out once to give him water and tell him to sit down. "I can't sit." "Then pace quieter. You're scaring the horses." When the cry came, thin, furious, impossibly loud for something so small, Wyatt stopped dead. His face went blank. Then Ruth opened the door and said, "Get in here, Callahan. Come meet your daughter." He walked into that room, and Addie saw him break open for the second time in their marriage. The first had been the night he told her he loved her, lying in the dark, terrified of Breckenridge, and even more terrified of his own heart. This time it was different. This time it was pure, unshadowed, uncomplicated, the raw and total surrender of a man holding his child for the first time. "She's perfect," he whispered. The baby was screaming, red-faced, furious about being cold and new, and in a world she hadn't asked to join. She was not, by any objective measure, perfect. She was magnificent. "Clara," Addie said. She was exhausted, emptied, more tired than she'd been after any day of ranch work. "After my mother." Clara. Wyatt tested the name. Clara Callahan. He looked at Addie, and his eyes were so full she thought he might drown in whatever was behind them. "Thank you for everything. For saying yes on that street. For staying. For fighting. For this." He looked down at the wailing bundle in his arms. "For her. We built this together, Wyatt. All of it." All of it. Spring came again. The ranch was different now. Bigger, stronger, more alive. The expanded garden was already producing. 20 new lambs from the sheep Addie's sewing money had bought were growing fat on the rough pasture. The cattle herd had increased by 6. Harold Perkins told them their account was the healthiest it had been in 15 years. Word came that Edmund Hale had left Cottonwood. His marriage to Louisa had collapsed under the weight of Breckenridge's diminished fortune and Edmund's own inadequacy. Louisa had taken their daughter back to her father's ranch. Edmund had gone east, or west, or somewhere. Nobody was certain, and nobody much cared. Addie heard the news from Delia and felt nothing but a distant, quiet compassion. Edmund Hale belonged to a different life, a different woman. The frightened seamstress from Boston who'd believed that pretty words on paper could be trusted more than calloused hands and honest eyes. On Clara's first birthday, they hosted a gathering at the ranch. Delia and Ruth and Maggie Brennan and Vivian Cartwright and Harold Perkins and Reverend Holt and Nathaniel Cross, who'd made the ride from Fredericksburg because, as he said, "I don't get invited to many parties, and the ones thrown by people I've helped beat land-grabbing crooks are my favorite kind." Delia cornered Addie in the kitchen, while Wyatt carried Clara around the yard, showing her off to everyone who'd hold still long enough. "You know what I love about your story?" Delia said. "Tell me." "You took the worst thing that could have happened to a woman and turned it into the best life I've ever watched anyone build." Delia's eyes were bright. "That terrified girl who walked into my boarding house with nothing but a carpetbag and $14. She's gone. And the woman standing here, with her ranch
and her family, and her friends, and her jars of perfect tomatoes lined up like soldiers. She's someone I'd follow into any fight. I couldn't have done any of it without you, Delia. Without all of you. Every single person at this party held us up when we couldn't hold ourselves. That's what community is. That's what family is. Not blood. Choice. The people who show up when showing up costs them something. Delia squeezed her hand. You built something worth showing up for, Adelaide Callahan. Don't you ever forget it. That night, after the guests had gone and Clara was asleep in her crib, Addie and Wyatt sat on the porch. Their porch. Expanded now, rebuilt with new boards Wyatt had cut and Addie had sanded. The night was cool, the stars thick, the silence the good kind, the kind that doesn't need filling. Are you happy? Wyatt asked. The same question he'd asked 100 times, because a man who'd lost everything twice needed to keep checking that the good things were still real. Addie thought about it honestly, the way she thought about everything now. This life was harder than anything she'd imagined when she'd stepped off that stagecoach. Harder than Boston. Harder than Edmund's lies. Harder than the worst day of sewing she'd ever survived. Her hands were scarred. Her back ached most mornings, and there were days when the work felt endless, and the money felt impossible, and the distance from everything she'd known felt like a physical weight on her chest. But she had a daughter sleeping safely in a room she and Wyatt had built with their own hands. She had a husband who told her the truth even when it was hard, who fought beside her, who held her in the dark when the world got too heavy, and let her hold him when his own darkness came calling. She had friends who'd gone to war for her, a community that had chosen her as firmly as she'd chosen it. She had land under her feet that nobody could take away. Yes, she said, completely. No regrets? Not one? Just one. She turned to look at him. I wish I'd slapped Edmund harder. Wyatt laughed. Real. Full. The laugh of a man who'd finally stopped bracing for the next blow and started trusting that the ground beneath him would hold. I love you, Adelaide Callahan. I love you, Wyatt Callahan, even though you still can't grow a tomato. I grew the corn. The corn grew itself. You just watched. I watched very supportively. She leaned against him. His arm came around her. Somewhere in the house, Clara made a small sound in her sleep and went quiet again. The wind moved through the grass. The cattle settled. The stars burned on, indifferent and beautiful, above a piece of Texas that belonged to two people who'd earned it with everything they had. Adelaide Mercer had crossed 2,000 miles for a promise that turned out to be a lie. She'd been humiliated in front of a town full of strangers, abandoned by a man who'd never deserved her, and left standing in the dirt with nothing but $14 and the clothes on her back. And then a quiet cowboy with scarred hands and honest eyes had picked up her carpet bag and changed the course of everything. Not because he saved her. He didn't. She saved herself. With work, with stubbornness, with the refusal to let other people's failures define her future. What Wyatt gave her wasn't rescue. It was the chance to rescue herself. A piece of ground to stand on. A partnership built on truth instead of pretty lies. A home that meant something because she'd bled for it, fought for it, built it with her own two hands. That was worth more than any love letter ever written. That was worth every single mile.